The morning sun stretched shadows across Camp Meridian as Dr. Sarah Chen grabbed her medical bag and headed toward the field hospital. She was only 28 but had already worked 3 tours in war zones. Soldiers and commanders trusted her completely because she never gave up on saving lives. Her small build and quiet nature made people think she was weak, but anyone who worked with her knew the truth. General Marcus Blackwood stood on a raised platform looking down at the training grounds. His chest displayed ribbons and medals from decades of service. At 52, he made people respect him through fear, not admiration. His name was known everywhere he went. He believed discipline meant intimidation, and weakness didn't belong in his army. Sarah had heard rumors about this new commander, who arrived just 2 weeks earlier. The old commander, Colonel Henderson, had been fair and supportive toward the medical team. When he was in charge, the field hospital ran smoothly, saving many lives, while the staff stayed happy and motivated. But Henderson got transferred, and now they had to adjust to Blackwood's iron grip. The first warning sign appeared during the morning briefing. Blackwood stood at the front, his cold gray eyes scanning the medical staff and support workers. His voice carried the weight of someone used to total obedience. "Starting now, this medical unit runs by new rules," he declared. "I looked at the old reports and the death rates are too high. We're wasting too many supplies on cases that probably won't survive." Dr. Chen's heart sank as she heard his new orders. Blackwood described a system that treated soldiers differently based on rank and how useful they were to missions. Lower-ranked soldiers and local civilians would get minimal care if supplies ran low. This went against everything Sarah learned in medical school and broke the basic rules of medical ethics. After the briefing, Sarah walked up to the general, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, I know we need to be efficient, but the Hippocratic Oath says we must treat all patients equally. We can't abandon people who need help just because of their rank or position." Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he looked at the young doctor. "Dr. Chen, right? I read your file. Good background, but you seem to forget this is a military operation, not a regular hospital. You'll follow orders or be replaced." Sarah didn't move, keeping her voice calm despite his threatening presence. "With respect, sir, medical ethics are more important than military rank. I can't follow orders that would let people die when we could save them." The room went silent as other medical workers watched. Some admired Sarah's bravery, while others worried about what might happen for challenging his authority. Blackwood's jaw clenched and his hands balled into fists. "You'll learn to follow orders, doctor, or face serious consequences," he said, his voice low and menacing. "This conversation is done." Over the next few days, Sarah kept working with the same commitment as always. She treated every patient with equal care, no matter their rank. When a young private came in with bad injuries from a roadside bomb, she worked non-stop to save his life, using valuable supplies that Blackwood had saved for higher priority cases. The general noticed her defiance and started using increasingly harsh tactics to control everyone. He gave the medical staff extra duties, set impossible deadlines for patient care, and ran surprise inspections looking for any mistakes. Despite these challenges, Sarah and her team kept their standards high. Things reached a breaking point when a group of local civilians, including several children, got caught in crossfire during a fight with enemy forces. The wounded arrived at the field hospital with injuries ranging from minor to critical. Sarah immediately started sorting patients by urgency, helping the most critical cases first regardless of age or nationality. General Blackwood showed up within minutes, his face red with anger as he watched the Vevel team treating civilian casualties. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "These people aren't our problem. Our supplies should be saved for our own soldiers." Sarah looked up from treating a child, a 7-year-old girl with metal fragments in her stomach. "Sir, these are human beings who need medical help. We have the ability to help them, and we won't turn them away." The fight escalated quickly as other medical staff watched in shock. Blackwood's voice got louder as he ordered Sarah to stop treating the civilians right away. She refused, continuing her work on the injured child while explaining that abandoning patients would break international humanitarian law. "You're deliberately going against my authority," Blackwood shouted, losing all control. "I won't accept disobedience from anyone under my command, no matter their job or training." Sarah finished stabilizing the child before turning to face the general. Her coworkers had never seen her show such quiet strength against authority. "I understand where you're coming from, sir, but I won't compromise my medical ethics for political reasons. These people deserve the same care we'd give our own soldiers." The standoff continued as other people started gathering, drawn by the loud voices and obvious tension. Some supported Sarah's position, while others feared the results of going against the commanding officer. The mood in the field hospital had become filled with conflict, threatening to hurt the unit's ability to work well and maintain morale. As the day went on, word of the fight spread throughout the camp. Soldiers started picking sides, with many supporting Dr. Chen's stand for what's right, while others worried about what happens when you challenge military authority. The situation was becoming more unstable, with possible effects far beyond the immediate conflict between a doctor and a general. That evening, as Sarah finished her rounds and checked on patients, she thought about what happened that day. She always knew that serving in a war zone would be tough, but she never imagined such a basic conflict between her medical duties and military orders. The safety of her patients and the honor of her profession were at stake, and she knew the coming days would test her like never before. The next morning brought an unsettling quiet to Camp Meridian. News of the fight between Dr. Chen and General Blackwood had spread like wildfire through the ranks, creating an atmosphere of worry and uncertainty. Soldiers whispered quietly during their morning routines, many expressing admiration for the doctor's courage, while others worried about possible consequences of going against the commanding officer. Sarah arrived at the field hospital early, as usual, to check on patients from yesterday's incident. The young girl she had treated was stable but would need several more days of close watching. The other civilian casualties were also recovering well, thanks to the quick and thorough care they received despite the general's objections. Nurse Patricia Williams, Sarah's closest friend in the medical unit, walked over with a worried look. "Sarah, I think you should know the general has been asking questions about your background and service record. He's also been talking with other officers about medical rules and chain of command issues." Sarah nodded, not surprised by this news. "I expected that. He's building a case to justify removing me from my job, but I won't let his threats change how I practice medicine." As the morning continued, General Blackwood put new limits on medical supplies and equipment. All requests for anything beyond basic first aid now needed his personal approval, creating unnecessary delays in patient care. It was clearly designed to make Sarah's job harder and show his control over medical operations. The first test of these new limits came when Sergeant Rodriguez was brought in with severe burns from a fuel explosion. Sarah looked at his condition and immediately requested advanced burn treatment supplies that could mean the difference between permanent disability and full recovery. The request form went to Blackwood's office, but hours passed without approval. "Doctor, the sergeant's condition is getting worse," reported Corpsman Johnson. "Without proper treatment supplies, we're limited in what we can do for him." Sarah faced a difficult choice. She could wait for official approval while her patient suffered, or she could get the supplies without permission. The choice was clear from a medical standpoint, but she knew it would make her conflict with the general worse. She headed to the supply depot, where she found the medical supplies locked behind extra security measures installed overnight. The guard on duty, Private Martinez, looked uncomfortable as he explained the new rule. "I'm sorry, doctor, but I have strict orders not to release any supplies without written permission from the general himself. Private Sergeant Rodriguez is in critical condition. Every minute we wait increases his risk of permanent injury or death. These supplies could save his career and possibly his life." The young soldier clearly wanted to help, but was caught between conflicting loyalties. "Ma'am, I understand, but if I disobey a direct order, I could face court-martial. My family depends on my military." Sarah spent valuable minutes trying to reach General Blackwood through official channels, but his staff said he was unavailable for medical matters. Frustrated but not defeated, she returned to the field hospital to find other ways to treat patients using what was available. Working with her team, Sarah created a treatment plan using basic supplies and equipment. It wasn't perfect, but her experience and creativity let them give effective care to Sergeant Rodriguez. The other medical workers watched in amazement as she showed techniques learned during her previous tours, adapting to limits with skill and determination. Word of Sarah's resourcefulness reached soldiers throughout the base. Many began to see her not just as a skilled doctor, but as someone who would fight for their well-being no matter what obstacles stood in the way. This growing support among enlisted soldiers didn't go unnoticed by General Blackwood, who saw it as a threat to his authority. That afternoon, Blackwood called Sarah to his office for a formal meeting. The room was bare and intimidating, with military rules and award certificates covering the wall. Behind his desk hung a portrait of him receiving a medal from a high-ranking Pentagon official, serving as a reminder of his connections and power. "Dr. Chen, please sit down," he said, his tone falsely calm. "I've been reviewing your recent activities, and I'm worried about what appears to be a pattern of disobedience and disregard for military rules." Sarah stayed composed as she took the offered chair. "Sir, I've been providing medical care to the best of my ability under increasingly difficult circumstances. If you're referring to my treatment of Sergeant Rodriguez, I followed proper medical procedures using available resources. You went to restricted areas without proper permission and influenced a guard to question his orders. That's a security breach and undermining of military discipline. I tried to follow proper channels, but when a patient's life is at stake, medical necessity comes first." The sergeant got the care he needed, and he's now on track for full recovery. Blackwood's eyes flashed with anger, but he controlled his voice carefully. "Doctor, you seem to think your medical training gives you the right to override military command decisions. This is a dangerous mistake I plan to correct." He slid a document across the desk toward her. "This is a formal warning for disobedience and breaking rules. It will go in your permanent military record. Consider it a final warning." Sarah read through the document, noting its carefully written language designed to make her actions look as bad as possible. She understood this was just the start of Blackwood's campaign to remove her from her position, or force her to follow his unethical order. "I understand your position, General, but I can't and won't compromise patient care to satisfy administrative convenience. If that puts me in conflict with your orders, then so be it." The meeting ended with both sides understanding the conflict was far from over. Blackwood had shown his willingness to use official channels to pressure Sarah, while she had made it clear her commitment to medical ethics was rock solid. As Sarah left the general's office, she ran into several enlisted soldiers who had been waiting nearby. Their presence wasn't by chance. Word had spread about the meeting, and they wanted to show support for the doctor who had been fighting for their welfare. "Don't let him push you around, Doc," whispered Corporal Thompson. "We all know what you're doing is right." The support from the soldiers was both encouraging and worrying. Sarah appreciated their loyalty, but she worried her conflict with Blackwood might put them at risk too. She knew enlisted soldiers had little protection against payback from commanding officers, and she didn't want her principles to cost others their careers or safety. That evening, as Sarah finished her rounds, she thought about the escalating situation. The formal warning was a clear step up, and she knew Blackwood would keep increasing pressure until she either gave in to his authority or was removed from her position. The question was whether she could maintain her standards of care while dealing with the increasingly hostile environment he was creating. The tension at Camp Meridian reached a new level over the next few days. General Blackwood's attempts to control medical operations had created effects throughout the entire base. Soldiers began questioning orders more often. Supply requests were looked at with excessive detail, and the general spirit of cooperation that had existed before was rapidly falling apart. Sarah continued her medical duties with the same dedication she had always shown, but she could feel the pressure building from multiple directions. Some of the medical staff were beginning to waver under the constant scrutiny and administrative pressure. Dr. Martinez, the second-ranking doctor in the unit, approached her after the morning briefing with obvious worry. "Sarah, I admire what you're trying to do, but this situation is becoming impossible. The general has threatened to transfer half our staff if we don't follow his rules. Maybe we should consider finding a middle ground that lets us keep working." Sarah understood her colleagues' concerns but also recognized the slippery slope that compromise represented. "David, I've seen what happens when medical professionals start making exceptions to ethical standards. It doesn't lead to reasonable middle ground. It leads to completely abandoning our principles." The conversation was cut short by an emergency call. A patrol had run into a roadside bomb, resulting in multiple casualties being transported to the field hospital. Sarah and her team immediately began preparing for the incoming wounded, setting up treatment areas and organizing their limited supplies. The first transport vehicle arrived within minutes carrying 3 soldiers with different levels of injury. The most badly wounded was Lieutenant Walsh, a young officer who had taken the full force of the blast. His injuries were extensive, including brain trauma, multiple broken bones, and severe internal bleeding. Under normal circumstances, he would have been an immediate priority for transport to a better-equipped facility. However, the second transport brought an even more challenging case. Private Johnson, barely 19 years old, had suffered similar injuries but lacked the rank and connections that might influence treatment decisions under Blackwood's new rules. Both patients needed immediate surgery and the use of the same limited specialized equipment. Sarah looked at both cases quickly, her medical training guiding her decisions. Private Johnson's injuries, while severe, had a slightly better chance due to his age and overall health. Lieutenant Walsh's brain injury made his chances of full recovery more uncertain. From a purely medical standpoint, treating Johnson first would likely give better results. As Sarah began preparing for surgery on Private Johnson, General Blackwood arrived at the field hospital. He looked at the scene and immediately noticed the treatment priority she had set. "Doctor, I need to speak with you right now," he commanded, his voice carrying across the entire medical area. Sarah looked up from her patient preparation. "Sir, I'm about to perform emergency surgery. Unless this is directly related to patient care, it will have to wait." "It is directly related to patient care. Lieutenant Walsh outranks the private and should get priority treatment. I'm ordering you to change your treatment priority immediately." The entire medical team froze, understanding the importance of this moment. Sarah's response would set a precedent that could affect every future case they handled. She took a deep breath before responding, knowing her next words would likely determine her fate at Camp Meridian. General medical triage is based on how severe injuries are and likelihood of successful treatment, not on rank or status. Private Johnson has a better chance of recovery and should be treated first according to proper medical protocols. Blackwood's face turned red with anger. "You are directly disobeying a lawful order from your commanding officer. I'm warning you for the last time. Treat Lieutenant Walsh first or face immediate court-martial." Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the medical facility on her. Her colleagues were torn between supporting her principles and protecting their own careers. The wounded soldiers were watching, understanding this moment would define how they'd be treated if they ever found themselves in a similar situation. "Sir, I can't in good conscience prioritize rank over medical need. Private Johnson will be treated first, followed by Lieutenant Walsh. Both will get the best care possible with available resources." The fight escalated rapidly as Blackwood's control finally broke. Years of total authority and military discipline hadn't prepared him for this level of resistance from a subordinate. His voice rose to a shout as he attacked Sarah in front of the entire medical staff. "You arrogant, disobedient piece of work. You think your medical degree gives you the right to ignore military chain of command? I've dealt with people like you before, self-righteous idealists who think they know better than everyone else." Sarah stayed calm in the face of his verbal attack, continuing her surgical preparations while he kept going with his rant. Her composure in the face of such aggressive behavior only seemed to fuel his rage further. "You want to play the hero, Doc? Fine, but you'll learn what happens to heroes who can't follow orders." What happened next shocked everyone present. In his fury, General Blackwood pulled out his gun and fired 5 shots into the air above the medical facility. The deafening noise of gunfire in the confined space caused everyone to freeze in terror. Medical equipment shook and several people dove for cover, thinking they were under attack. The silence that followed was complete. Blackwood stood with his weapon still drawn, breathing heavily as he stared at Sarah. She hadn't moved from her position beside Private Johnson, her hands still steady as she held the surgical instruments. Her calm behavior in the face of such an extreme show of aggression was remarkable. "Did that get your attention, Doctor?" he said, his voice now unnaturally calm. "I hope you understand now that I am deadly serious about establishing order in this unit." Sarah looked directly at the general, her voice steady and clear. "Sir, you just fired a weapon in a medical facility filled with wounded soldiers and medical staff. That action has put patient lives at risk and broken numerous military rules about weapon safety and threatening behavior." The reality of what he had done began to sink in as Blackwood noticed the shocked faces around him. Several soldiers were reaching for their own weapons, unsure whether they were witnessing an attack or a breakdown by their commanding officer. The medical staff stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to such an unprecedented situation. "Everyone back to your positions," Blackwood shouted, trying to regain control. "This is still my command, and my orders will be followed." But something fundamental had changed in that moment. The respect and fear that had previously kept his subordinates in line had been replaced by shock and disbelief. Several of the medical staff members were already documenting what happened, understanding the serious implications of a commanding officer firing weapons to intimidate medical staff. Sarah slowly returned her attention to her patient, beginning the surgery she had planned, while the general continued to stand nearby with his weapon holstered but clearly visible. The message was clear. He was prepared to use whatever means necessary to enforce his authority. As she worked to save Private Johnson's life, Sarah knew everything had changed. The general had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the consequences of this moment would extend far beyond their personal conflict. The question now was whether anyone would have the courage to hold him accountable for his actions. The surgery moved forward in an atmosphere of tense silence. Sarah's hands stayed steady despite the unprecedented circumstances. Her years of training letting her block out the traumatic events and focus entirely on saving Private Johnson's life. Every member of the medical team worked with heightened awareness, knowing their every action was being watched by the armed general who remained in the facility. General Blackwood paced near the entrance, his hand occasionally moving to his holstered weapon as he watched Sarah work. His face showed a mix of rage and uncertainty. The adrenaline from his outburst was starting to fade, and the implications of his actions were becoming clear. He had crossed a line no military officer should cross, but his pride prevented him from acknowledging the severity of his mistake. After 2 hours of intensive surgery, Sarah successfully stabilized Private Johnson. His injuries were severe, but the prompt treatment had given him a fighting chance at recovery. She immediately turned her attention to Lieutenant Walsh, working with the same level of dedication despite the hostile environment. During the second surgery, word of the incident began to spread throughout Camp Meridian. Soldiers who hadn't witnessed the event directly heard conflicting reports about what actually happened. Some claimed the general had fired warning shots at enemy forces near the medical facility, while others whispered about a complete breakdown of command authority. Sergeant Major Harrison, the senior non-commissioned officer at the base, was among the first to piece together the truth. As a 30-year veteran with extensive combat experience, he understood the serious implications of what had occurred. An officer threatening medical staff with firearms represented a complete breakdown of military discipline and could potentially result in court-martial for everyone involved. Harrison quietly began interviewing witnesses, carefully documenting their accounts while avoiding direct confrontation with General Blackwood. His investigation revealed a consistent pattern of escalating behavior and increasing conflicts between the commanding officer and the medical staff. The weapon firing was not an isolated incident, but the peak of weeks of deteriorating leadership. Meanwhile, Sarah completed the second surgery successfully. Lieutenant Walsh's outlook was uncertain due to his brain injury, but she had addressed his immediate life-threatening condition. Both patients were stable and receiving appropriate post-surgery care despite the challenging circumstances. As she removed her surgical gloves and prepared to document the procedures, General Blackwood approached her once again. His behavior had changed somewhat. The explosive rage had been replaced by cold, calculated anger. Dr. Chen, your blatant disregard for military authority has forced me to take extreme measures. I want you to understand what happened here today is entirely your fault. Sarah looked at him with a mix of exhaustion and determination. General, what happened here today was an armed superior officer threatening medical staff who were trying to save lives. I take no responsibility for your decision to draw a weapon in a medical facility. You pushed me to that point with your disobedience and arrogance. If you had simply followed orders, none of this would have been necessary. Sir, following your orders would have meant providing substandard care to wounded soldiers based on their rank rather than their medical needs. That's not something I will ever do, regardless of the consequence. The conversation was overheard by several medical staff members and soldiers who had gathered nearby. Many were recording the exchange on personal devices, understanding the historical significance of what was happening. In an age of social media and instant communication, word of the incident was already beginning to reach beyond the boundaries of Camp Meridian. Blackwood noticed the increased attention and realized his actions were being documented. Anyone found recording or discussing these events with unauthorized people will face immediate disciplinary action, he announced loudly. This is a matter of operational security and military discipline. However, the threat only served to further push him away from his subordinate. Several soldiers exchanged glances that clearly indicated their intention to report the incident through proper channels regardless of potential payback. That evening, Sergeant Major Harrison requested a private meeting with General Blackwood. As the senior enlisted advisor, he had both the authority and the responsibility to address serious breaches of military conduct. The meeting took place in Blackwood's office, away from the watching eyes and ears of other staff. Sir, I need to discuss the events that happened in the medical facility today, Harrison began carefully. What I witnessed represents a serious departure from acceptable command behavior and military rules. Blackwood's jaw tightened as he realized the scope of the problem he had created. Sergeant Major, I was establishing command authority in the face of deliberate disobedience. Dr. Chen's refusal to follow direct orders left me no choice but to show the seriousness of the situation. General, with all due respect, Firing a weapon to intimidate medical staff is never acceptable under any circumstances. It breaks multiple rules about weapon safety, threatens civilian contractors, and undermines confidence in command leadership. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Harrison carefully explaining the legal and practical implications of Blackwood's actions. He outlined the potential consequences, including investigation by military police, court-martial, and permanent damage to his military career. Sir, I strongly recommend you consider requesting an immediate transfer or stepping down from command pending a full investigation. This situation can only get worse if it continues to escalate. Blackwood refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, instead insisting his actions were justified by the circumstances. Sergeant Major, I won't be intimidated by a subordinate who refuses to follow orders. Dr. Chen created this situation through her arrogance and disrespect for military authority. Meanwhile, Sarah was finishing her shift in the medical facility, checking on her post-surgery patients, and briefing the night shift on their conditions. Both Private Johnson and Lieutenant Walsh were stable but would need careful watching throughout the night. Nurse Williams approached her with obvious concern. Sarah, several people have advised you to document everything that happened today and consider filing formal complaints through military channels. What the general did was completely out of line. I know, Patricia. I've been thinking about the implications all evening. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about setting a precedent for how medical staff can be treated when they advocate for their patients. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Morrison, the base communications officer. He carried an official-looking document that immediately caught Sarah's attention. Dr. Chen, I've been ordered to deliver this message to you personally. It's from General Blackwood, marked as urgent and confidential. Sarah accepted the envelope and read its contents carefully. The message was brief but threatening. Dr. Chen, report to my office at 6 a.m. tomorrow for final resolution of command authority issues. Failure to appear will result in immediate arrest for disobedience and neglect of duty. This matter ends tomorrow, one way or another. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Blackwood was preparing for a final confrontation that would determine whether Sarah could continue her medical practice at Camp Meridian. The stakes had been raised beyond simple disagreement about medical rules. This was now a test of whether military authority could override professional ethics through intimidation and threats. As Sarah prepared for what might be her final night at the base, she thought about the events that led to this moment. She had entered military service to help save lives and serve her country, never imagining she would face such fundamental conflicts between her medical obligations and military order. The question now was whether she had the strength to keep fighting for her principles, knowing the general appeared willing to use any means necessary to force her to give in or remove her from her position entirely. The night passed slowly at Camp Meridian, with an undercurrent of tension, affecting everyone who had witnessed or heard about the previous day's event. Sarah spent the evening reviewing her medical records and personal documents, preparing for the possibility she might be arrested or forcibly removed from her position. She also took time to write detailed notes about the incident, knowing accurate documentation would be crucial for any future investigations. At 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, Sarah made her way to General Blackwood's office. She had chosen to arrive early, wanting to show her willingness to face whatever consequences awaited her. As she walked through the base, several soldiers offered quiet words of support, their expressions showing both admiration for her courage and concern for her safety. Outside the general's office, she ran into an unexpected scene. Sergeant Major Harrison stood near the entrance along with Captain Rodriguez from the Legal Affairs Office and two military police officers. Their presence suggested this meeting would be far more formal and serious than a simple disciplinary conversation. Dr. Chen, Harrison nodded respectfully as she approached. I want you to know Captain Rodriguez is here to make sure proper procedures are followed during this meeting. You have the right to request legal representation if you wish. Sarah appreciated the gesture but felt confident in her position. Thank you, Sergeant Major. I believe I can handle this situation, but I'm grateful for your concern. At exactly 6 a.m., the group entered Blackwood's office. The general sat behind his desk, his uniform perfect and his expression stern. However, Sarah noticed signs of stress that hadn't been present in their earlier meetings. Dark circles under his eyes and a slight shake in his hands suggested he had spent a sleepless night considering his options. Dr. Chen, please sit, Blackwood began formally. This meeting is being held to address serious issues of disobedience and failure to follow direct military orders. I want to be clear, your actions yesterday represented the final straw in a pattern of defiant behavior that can't be tolerated. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward with a document folder. General, before we continue, I need to inform you this meeting is being officially recorded and certain procedures must be followed when addressing allegations of this nature. Blackwood's irritation at the legal officer's presence was obvious. Captain, I'm perfectly capable of handling disciplinary matters within my own command, without interference from legal affairs. Sir, with respect, the nature of yesterday's incident requires proper protocols be observed. Chen has rights under military law that must be protected regardless of the circumstances leading to this meeting. The exchange highlighted the complexity of the situation. While Blackwood clearly wanted to handle the matter as a simple case of disobedience, the involvement of weapons and threats against medical staff had raised it to a level requiring legal oversight. Sarah listened to the procedural discussions while studying the general's behavior. Despite his outward show of authority, she could see he was struggling with the consequences of his actions. The presence of legal oversight and military police suggested higher command levels were already aware of the situation. General Blackwood, Sarah spoke clearly when the procedural matters had been addressed. I want to state for the record I have acted according to medical ethics and proper protocols throughout my service at this base. My decisions have been based solely on providing the best possible care for wounded soldiers, regardless of their rank or status. Dr. Chen, your refusal to follow direct orders from superior officers represents a fundamental breakdown of military discipline. Your so-called medical ethics don't override the chain of command or military necessity. Captain Rodriguez stepped in again, consulting his notes carefully. Sir, I need to point out medical staff have specific protections under military law and international treaties regarding their professional obligations. Dr. Chen's actions appear to fall within accepted guidelines for medical decision-making in combat zones. The legal officer's statement clearly frustrated Blackwood, who had expected the meeting to be a simple matter of imposing disciplinary action. The presence of legal protections for medical staff was complicating his efforts to assert absolute command authority. Captain, I don't need lectures about military law from junior officers. I've been commanding troops since before you were commissioned, and I understand the requirements of military discipline. Yes, sir, but firing weapons to intimidate medical staff falls outside accepted command practices and may be a criminal offense under military law. The room fell silent as the full implications of Rodriguez's statement became clear. Blackwood had been so focused on punishing Sarah for her defiance that he had failed to consider the serious legal consequences of his own actions. The weapon firing, which he had intended as a show of authority, was now being described as potential criminal behavior. Sergeant Major Harrison stepped forward with another document. General, I've completed my preliminary investigation of yesterday's incident. The witness statements are consistent and paint a clear picture of events that may require investigation by military police. Sarah watched as Blackwood's confidence began to crumble. He had entered this meeting expecting to resolve the situation by forcing her to resign or comply, but instead found himself facing potential criminal charges for his own conduct. This is ridiculous, Blackwood said, his voice rising. I was establishing command authority in the face of deliberate disobedience. Every action I took was justified by the circumstances. Captain Rodriguez consulted his documents again. Sir, threatening medical staff with weapons is never justified under military rules, regardless of the circumstances. The incident has already been reported to higher command levels, and a formal investigation will be required. The meeting was interrupted by the arrival of another officer, Colonel Patterson from Regional Command Headquarters. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room, as everyone recognized the situation had escalated beyond local command authority. General Blackwood, Patterson said as he entered, I've driven through the night to address reports of serious command problems at this base. I need to speak with all parties involved to understand exactly what happened. Sarah realized the events of the previous day had triggered a response from higher military authorities. The colonel's presence suggested her conflict with Blackwood had grown into a matter of regional concern, potentially affecting multiple command levels. Colonel Patterson, Blackwood attempted to maintain his composure. This is simply a matter of local discipline that has been blown out of proportion by overzealous subordinates. Patterson's expression remained neutral as he reviewed the documents Rodriguez handed him. General, the reports I've received describe weapon firing in a medical facility and threats against medical staff. These are serious allegations that require thorough investigation. As the morning went on, Sarah found herself giving detailed testimony about the events leading up to the weapon firing incident. Her calm, professional behavior contrasted sharply with Blackwood's increasingly agitated responses to questions about his actions. As the colonel's investigation revealed a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond the single incident with Sarah, other staff had documented instances of inappropriate conduct. unreasonable orders, and escalating threats that painted a picture of a commanding officer who had lost the ability to lead effectively. Dr. Chen, Colonel Patterson addressed her directly. Your actions appear to have been consistent with proper medical protocols and professional ethics. While the situation has been challenging, you have conducted yourself appropriately under difficult circumstances. The validation from higher command was both relieving and worrying for Sarah. While it confirmed her professional conduct had been appropriate, it also highlighted the serious nature of the command breakdown that had occurred at Camp Meridian. As the investigation continued, it became clear the resolution would have implications far beyond the immediate participants. The incident had exposed fundamental issues about the balance between military authority and professional ethics that would require careful consideration by senior command levels. The investigation by Colonel Patterson continued throughout the morning with testimony from medical staff, soldiers, and support workers who had witnessed various aspects of the escalating conflict between General Blackwood and Dr. Chen. Each account painted a consistent picture of a commanding officer whose judgment had become increasingly impaired by his inability to accept professional disagreement. Private Martinez, the young soldier who had been placed in an impossible position during the supply depot incident, gave particularly compelling testimony. His account of being ordered to deny medical supplies to critically wounded soldiers clearly showed the ethical problems created by Blackwood's policies. Sir, I didn't want to refuse Dr. Chen access to the medical supplies, Martinez explained to Colonel Patterson. Sergeant Rodriguez was suffering, and I knew those supplies could help him, but I was told I'd face court-martial if I disobeyed the general's orders about supply permission. The testimony revealed how Blackwood's policies had created moral conflicts for staff throughout the base, forcing them to choose between following orders and supporting life-saving medical care. Several soldiers described feeling torn between military discipline and their basic human instincts to help wounded comrades. Corpsman Johnson gave detailed evidence about the impact of the new medical rules on patient care. Colonel, we've always prioritized patients based on how severe their injuries are and likelihood of successful treatment. The general's new system forced us to consider rank and status instead of medical need, which goes against everything we were trained to do. As the testimonies built up, a clear pattern emerged. General Blackwood had systematically tried to put medical ethics below his personal interpretation of military authority, creating conflicts that ultimately led to the weapon-firing incident. Colonel Patterson also interviewed the patients who had been present during the confrontation. Private Johnson, despite his serious injuries, gave a clear account of the events he had witnessed while being prepared for surgery. Sir, Chen was trying to save my life when the general started shouting at her. Then he pulled out his gun and fired shots in the air. I thought we were being attacked and I was scared I was going to die not from my injuries but from whatever was happening between them. The patient's perspective added a crucial dimension to the investigation. The weapon firing had not only threatened medical staff, but it also traumatized wounded soldiers who were already dealing with serious injuries and medical procedures. Lieutenant Walsh, who had been the subject of the treatment priority dispute, offered his own perspective despite his ongoing recovery from brain injury. Colonel, I'm an officer, but I would never want special medical treatment just because of my rank. Chen made the right call treating Private Johnson first. His injuries were more treatable, and that's what good medicine looks like. The officer's statement undermined one of Blackwood's key justifications for his behavior. Even the person who would have benefited from the rank-based treatment system supported Sarah's medical decision-making process. As the investigation moved forward, Colonel Patterson began to understand the broader implications of what had happened at Camp Meridian. The incident represented a fundamental clash between military hierarchy and professional ethics that had serious implications for medical operations throughout the military. Chen, Patterson said during a private interview, your situation has highlighted important questions about the independence of medical staff in military settings. While military discipline is essential, medical professionals must maintain the ability to make decisions based on their training and ethical obligations. Sarah appreciated the colonel's understanding, but remained concerned about the precedent being set. Sir, I never intended for this situation to escalate to this level. I simply wanted to provide the best possible care for wounded soldiers, regardless of their rank or status. The conflict arose because General Blackwood viewed medical decisions as challenges to his authority. Doctor, your commitment to medical ethics in a challenging environment is admirable. However, we need to find ways to prevent similar conflicts in the future while maintaining both military discipline and professional medical standards. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Colonel Patterson received a call from Pentagon officials who had learned about the incident through news media reports. The story had been leaked by someone at the base, and major news outlets were beginning to cover the confrontation between a military commander and medical staff. General Blackwood, Patterson addressed the increasingly isolated commanding officer. This situation has now attracted national attention. Media outlets are reporting on military commanders threatening medical staff with weapons, and the Pentagon is demanding immediate answer. Blackwood's face went pale as he realized his actions had created a public relations disaster for the military. The story of a general drawing a weapon on a doctor who was trying to save soldiers' lives was exactly the kind of incident that could undermine public confidence in military leadership. Colonel, this is all being blown out of proportion by people who don't understand military discipline and the requirements of command authority. Blackwood protested. Dr. Chen's disobedience forced me to take strong action to maintain order. General, regardless of the circumstances leading up to it, firing a weapon in a medical facility is never acceptable. The incident has created serious legal and public relations problems that extend far beyond this base. The media attention grew throughout the afternoon, with reporters trying to contact staff at Camp Meridian for additional information about the incident. The military's public affairs office was struggling to manage the story while the investigation continued. Sarah found herself at the center of a national conversation about medical ethics, military authority, and the treatment of healthcare professionals in combat zones. Veterans organizations began issuing statements supporting her position, while some military commentators criticized her for challenging command authority. Dr. Nurse Williams approached her during a brief break in the investigation. You should know medical professionals around the country are rallying to support you. The American Medical Association has issued a statement defending your right to make medical decisions based on professional ethics. The external support was encouraging, but Sarah remained focused on the immediate situation at Camp Meridian. Her primary concern was ensuring future medical staff would not face similar conflicts when advocating for their patients. As evening approached, Colonel Patterson concluded his preliminary investigation and prepared to make recommendations to his superiors. The evidence clearly supported Sarah's position and raised serious questions about General Blackwood's fitness for command. Ladies and gentlemen, Patterson addressed the assembled staff. This investigation has revealed serious breakdowns in command leadership and inappropriate interference with medical operations. I will be making recommendations to regional command about necessary personnel changes and policy clarifications. The colonel's statement suggested significant changes were coming to Camp Meridian. While the final resolution remained uncertain, it was clear the conflict between Sarah and Blackwood had exposed fundamental issues that required immediate attention from senior military leadership. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as the investigation concluded. While the evidence supported her position, she understood the broader implications of the incident would continue to echo throughout the military medical system for months or years to come. The question now was whether her stand for medical ethics would result in meaningful changes to protect future healthcare professionals in similar situations. 3 weeks after the investigation concluded, Camp Meridian looked dramatically different. General Blackwood had been relieved of command and reassigned pending a full court-martial investigation. The weapon-firing incident, combined with documented evidence of inappropriate command behavior, had resulted in criminal charges that would likely end his military career. Colonel Patterson had temporarily assumed command of the base, while a permanent replacement was selected. His first priority had been restoring normal operations and rebuilding trust between command leadership and medical staff. The oppressive atmosphere that had characterized Blackwood's time was quickly replaced by a collaborative environment focused on mission effectiveness. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself in an unexpected position. The media attention surrounding her conflict with Blackwood had made her a national symbol for medical professionals standing up to inappropriate authority. Medical journals published articles about her case, and she received invitations to speak at conferences about ethics in military medicine. More importantly, her stand had triggered a comprehensive review of policies governing medical operations in combat zones. The Pentagon had initiated a working group to clarify the relationship between military command authority and medical professional independence, with Sarah serving as a key advisor to the committee. Chen, Colonel Patterson said during one of their regular meetings, "The changes you've helped start will affect medical operations throughout the military. Your willingness to stand up for professional ethics has created lasting improvements for healthcare providers in combat zones." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but remained humble about her role in the broader changes. "Colonel, I was just doing my job as a doctor. I never intended to become a symbol or advocate for policy changes. I simply wanted to provide the best possible care for wounded soldiers." The new command structure at Camp Meridian had already produced measurable improvements in medical operations. Patient outcomes had improved significantly under the restored ethical treatment protocols, and the medical staff reported much higher job satisfaction and morale. Private Johnson, who had been at the center of the treatment priority dispute, made a full recovery from his injuries. His case had become a powerful example of why medical decisions should be based on clinical factors rather than military. During his recovery, he often visited the medical facility to thank the staff who had saved his life. "Doc Chen," he said during one of these visits, "I know I was just a private, but you fought for me like I was the most important person in the world. That means everything to a soldier." Lieutenant Walsh had also recovered well despite his more serious brain injury. His support for Sarah's medical decisions during the investigation had helped show the rank-based treatment system lacked support even among the officers who would have benefited from it. The media coverage of the incident had evolved from simple reporting about a military conflict to broader discussions about healthcare ethics and the treatment of medical professionals. Sarah had initially been reluctant to engage with journalists, but she eventually realized public attention could help prevent similar situations in the future. "The issue isn't about military versus civilian authority," she explained during a television interview. "It's about ensuring medical professionals can make decisions based on their training and ethical obligations, regardless of the setting in which they work. Wounded soldiers deserve the best possible care, and that requires medical independence." Her clear defense of medical ethics resonated with healthcare professionals across all specialties. Medical organizations that had previously been reluctant to challenge military authority began advocating more strongly for the professional rights of their members serving in combat zones. The Pentagon's policy review resulted in significant changes to military rules governing medical operations. The new guidelines clearly establish the principle that medical staff have primary authority over clinical decisions, with command input limited to logistical and resource allocation matters. General Morrison, who was selected as the permanent replacement for Blackwood, had extensive experience working with medical staff and understood the importance of maintaining professional independence. His first meeting with the medical staff emphasized his commitment to supporting their work. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the assembled medical staff, "your professional expertise and ethical standards are essential to our mission. My job is to provide you with the resources and support you need to save lives, not to interfere with your medical decisions." The contrast with Blackwood's approach was immediately apparent to everyone present. The new commander's collaborative leadership style created an environment where medical professionals felt respected and supported in their work. Sarah's role at Camp Meridian evolved significantly in the months following the investigation. She was promoted to Chief Medical Officer for the region, with responsibility for overseeing medical operations at multiple bases. The position allowed her to implement the ethical standards and professional practices she had fought to protect. Dr. Chen, Nurse Williams, commented during one of their shifts, "It's amazing to see how much has changed since you stood up to General Blackwood. The entire atmosphere here is different, and our patient care has improved dramatically." Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. What had begun as a simple disagreement about medical priorities had evolved into a national conversation about professional ethics and military authority. The experience had been challenging and sometimes frightening, but the positive changes that resulted made the struggle worthwhile. The soldiers at Camp Meridian had also benefited significantly from the improved command structure and medical policies. Morale had increased substantially, and the relationship between military personnel and medical staff had become more collaborative and trusting. Sergeant Major Harrison, who had played a crucial role in documenting the original incident and supporting the investigation, was awarded a commendation for his professionalism and integrity. His willingness to challenge inappropriate authority had helped protect both medical staff and the soldiers they served. "Doctor," he said during an informal conversation, "what you did took real courage. A lot of people would have just gone along with the general's orders to avoid conflict, but standing up for what's right made this a better place for everyone." The long-term implications of the incident continued to unfold as other military medical facilities implemented similar policy changes. Sarah began receiving reports from medical professionals around the world who had been inspired by her example to advocate for professional independence in their own setting. 6 months after the confrontation with General Blackwood, Sarah was invited to address the graduating class at the military medical school where she had trained years earlier. Her speech focused on the importance of maintaining ethical standards, regardless of external pressure. Your medical training has prepared you to save lives and heal injuries, she told the young doctors and nurses. But your education must also include the courage to advocate for your patients and professional principles when they are threatened. The oath you take as medical professionals transcends any other authority or pressure you may face. The audience gave her a standing ovation, understanding her experiences had created important precedents for their own future service. Many approached her afterward to express their appreciation for the changes she had helped bring about in military medical practice. Sarah looked back on the events that had transformed her career and influenced military medical policy. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The confrontation with General Blackwood had been frightening and challenging, but it had ultimately resulted in meaningful improvements for medical professionals and patients throughout the military system. The incident had proven individual courage and professional integrity could overcome even entrenched authority when principles were at stake. Most importantly, wounded soldiers at bases around the world would receive better medical care because one doctor had refused to compromise her ethical standards in the face of intimidation and threats. The story of Dr. Sarah Chen and her conflict with General Blackwood became a case study taught in military leadership courses, medical ethics classes, and professional development programs. It served as a powerful reminder that doing the right thing often requires courage, but the benefits of standing up for principles extend far beyond the immediate situation to create lasting positive change for countless others.